A biblical proverb states, Erech apayim rav tevunah, whoever is patient has great understanding. A recent UK study of wisdom didn't just ask people, are you wise? Instead, they used a well-known psychology scale, the San Diego Wisdom Scale, to measure the way wisdom shows up in daily life. They asked questions like, do you take time to reflect before you act? Can you see things from someone else's point of view? Do you keep learning even when it's hard? They also measured people's patience and found that those who could slow down, pay attention, and hold back judgment scored the highest on the wisdom scale. Adding to that, a Harvard study last year placed people in a room and gave them a choice. Sit quietly for 15 minutes or give yourself a painful electric shock with a probe on the table. A vast majority chose the shock rather than just sitting still. Psychologist Arthur Brooks explains, you need to be bored. You will have less meaning and you will be more depressed if you're never bored. Boredom activates what neuroscientists call the default mode network, the part of the brain that switches on when you're not distracted. So, say you're sitting at a red light, and that's when you have that thought, oh, shoot, I left my cell phone sitting on the table at the restaurant. That's when reflection and creativity begin. But often, as you can hear from the example, we don't like it. Does this explain why some people find patience so painful too? It seems our patience may be short because we are being conditioned to instant gratification. One click, just tap, same day done. Our phones give us answers in seconds, and soon that expectation of instant results takes root everywhere, making us less patient, more impulsive, and ultimately less wise. Of course, when we commit to doing something, we ought to do it promptly. The rabbis had a saying, make your judgment cut through rock as sharp as a mountain, but only after you've become certain. And certainty requires patience, the willingness to double check, to dot the I's and cross the T's. Proverbs teaches wisdom begins with fear of heaven. To be wise, we have to pause. We have to make space for awe. Rambam calls this derech emsait, the middling path. He points out that patience, erech apayim, is one of the very qualities Moses ascribes to God, following the golden calf. Without patience, we are less present, less reflective, too hasty, and often are our own worst enemy in the work of tikkun olam, repairing our world. Patience leads to wisdom by slowing us down, to help us respond with respect. As we model respect, we encourage others to mirror it back at us. On Rosh Hashanah, we recall how Abraham's trust in God was tested as he prepared to sacrifice his son Isaac. Abraham took time as they climbed and constructed an altar to slowly and patiently explain the task that he had been commanded. And his patience was rewarded with God's clarification before he carried through on an irreversible act. God provided a ram instead, its horns caught in the thicket, as a sacrifice for a just God who would never command us to personally offer the blood of our children. The psalmist says, this day marks the beginning of your works, a law for Israel, a judgment for the God of Jacob. On this very day, all creatures are reviewed. Mi yichyeh, mi yamut, who will live and who will die. Words we echo in Unatana Tokef. In the 6th century rabbinic text, Pesikta Rev Kahana, Rabbi Eliezer teaches that Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of the 6th day when human beings were created, and before that first 6th day ended, humanity had already eaten from the fruit of the Garden of Eden. We stood in judgment, and in the 11th hour we were granted Shabbat, itself a clemency, a reprieve, a chance to begin again. On Rosh Hashanah, it's not only the anniversary of our birth, not only the anniversary of the day of judgment, but it's also the day that mercy enters the world. Mere hours following our creation, we stumble, but God was patient and granted us another chance. Our struggle ever since has been to show that same patience with one another. You know, many people want patience without waiting, trust without testing, faith without struggle, but none of these things come instantly. God may be slow to anger, but we're too often quick to judge. Impatience feeds suspicion. Conclusions come before understanding. That's why now more than ever we need to step back and ask why. What do we actually owe each other? Wisdom teaches the first thing we owe one another is respect. It slows our judgments, sharpens our empathy, and reminds us that every human being is created in the image of God. Remember what Eliezer taught? Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of our creation. In creating humanity, God says, let us create human beings in our image and in our likeness. Every person is created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. For that alone, we owe every person respect. But what about trust? Trust is something different. We owe respect to every person, but trust must be earned. The rabbis taught that it was part of our human nature for us to be mu'ad, liable to stumble. We know we're imperfect. We're tempted to sin. Forbidden fruits, forbidden fruits are all about us. Adding to our deficit of trust, we live in an age where conspiracy theories race ahead of truth, where anger boils into violence and hate spreads like wildfire. Our nation has become polarized. People from different ends of the political spectrum are struggling even to speak to each other. In Israel, too, the ongoing violence and grief since October 7th has shaken our sense of security. Contention on college campuses has spread into middle school classrooms. The international community accuses Israel of genocide as Hamas hides among hostages and civilians. These are heavy realities, but they make our work of patience and rebuilding trust all the more urgent. I know, for many of us, our world feels broken right now. But more hate will not solve our problems. Even those who have broken our trust still deserve our respect. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, let no man pull you low enough to hate him. Hatred is the source of so much evil in our world. People hate Jews, people hate Muslims, people hate LGBTQ folk, and people hate immigrants. People hate Democrats. People hate Republicans. People hate black folk and people hate white folk. People hate the president and people hate the people who hate the president. People hate women. People hate men. People hate themselves and people hate God. And there's not a chance in heaven that any of this will change until different people can sit down together, respectful of differences, and begin the hard work of rebuilding trust. Respect does not mean trust automatically, but it opens the door. It creates the possibility for accountable relationships where a deep trust is our blessing. When we work together in trust, anything becomes possible. Imagine what it would look like for our community. Could Buffalo model that? How could Temple Beth Zion offer peaceful shelters in the midst of a turbulent world? The anniversary of October 7th is just 2 weeks away. And on Tuesday, when it happens during the festival of Sukkot, that evening we'll hold vigil as we sing songs of memory beneath the Broder Sukkah with our choir. And on Thursday, we'll welcome friends from the Christian, Muslim, and Sikh community to our Sukkah right here at 805 Delaware to help us with our Dignity Grows project and to hold a panel of faith leaders to cultivate friendships in a time of global tension. Building on the work of the Freedom Saders and the Blum Project, we strive to build bridges of understanding. That vision's not abstract, it's already happening in ways large and small. Nevertheless, as we seek to rebuild trust, we must be reasonable with our expectations of each other. We aren't muad, liable to err because God gave us free will, and with it comes the inevitability of mistakes. But mistakes are best treated as opportunities to learn and grow rather than failures. The well-known psychologist Carol Dweck, she calls this the growth mindset, the belief that our abilities and character are not fixed but can be developed. She writes, becoming is better than being. In other words, we're not judged only for what we are today, but for our capacity to grow tomorrow. Even if we're on the wrong path, we can practice patience, be observant to get back on track. Teshuvah is Judaism's growth mindset. These days of awe remind us that we're not trapped by last year's failures. We're judged not only for who we are, but for who we are becoming. The blast of the shofar declares we still stand by the covenant we made with God. We stand by it and ask for forgiveness for all our shortcomings. We commit ourselves to repentance and to striving to live up to our values. On this, my fourth Rosh Hashanah at Temple Beth Zion, let us affirm our faith that, should we fall, God and Torah will be there to help us right ourselves. The psalmist says, those who trust in the eternal are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved. And Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav put it this way. He said, if you believe it's possible for it to be broken, then you must also believe it's possible for it to be repaired. This right here is the ark of faith. Patience nurtures wisdom. Wisdom conditions respect. Respect makes trust possible, and trust makes us a team. That is the heart of faith. To believe in the possibility of healing our divisions, to believe that xenophobia is not the end of our story, to believe that even when trust between people is shattered, with God's help, it can be rebuilt. Imagine what our city, our nation, even our world could look like if we slowed down in patience, honored the image of God in every person, and began the sacred work of rebuilding trust across divides. And may this be a year, then, that we slow down in patience, that we show respect to every person, and with God's help, rebuild the trust that heals our world. May this be God's will. Can you hear on song?